about a year and a half after launching our business. We got on a plane. We spent 2 weeks in Europe. We visited 5 different countries, had an incredible time, and we did not go online once for our business. This is 1 year and a half after starting our business, and we generated just as much revenue that month as we did the month before.
Get ready to build, protect, and sell your expertise online with the Online Genius Podcast. You'll laugh. We hope you won't cry, but you'll always be informed and prepared so you can have the success you want. Here's your host, Bobby Klink.
Hey everybody, welcome to this week's episode of the Online Genius Podcast. I am your host, Bobby Klink, and I am really excited for today's show because I expect I'm going to learn something about an area that I know I need to improve in my business and that you probably need to improve in your business too, and that's creating systems. Look, every year I have the best intentions about creating new systems and processes for my business, especially at the beginning of the year when we're all trying to do planning. In fact, just yesterday, I was looking into some systems and how to systematize and automate parts of my business. But I've got to be honest, I've never really figured it out. And I figured if I'm struggling with this, this is probably an area where other people are struggling as well. And so I figured we could all use some expert advice on how to create systems and processes for our businesses. And so, look, if you're an online entrepreneur and you're going to talk to somebody about systems for online entrepreneurs, why not go to the guru who helps operate one of the most prolific business podcasts and online businesses out there? And so with that, today's expert guest is Kate Erickson. Kate is a creator, engager, and implementer over at Entrepreneur on Fire, a 7-day-a-week podcast that interviews today's most inspiring and successful entrepreneurs. She is also the host of the podcast Kate's Take and author of The Fire Path, a beginner's guide to growing your online business. Kate is passionate about helping entrepreneurs create freedom in their businesses and life through developing systems and processes that help their business scale and grow. Welcome to the Online Genius Podcast, Kate.
Bobby, thank you. I'm blushing over here. That was such a generous intro. Thank you.
Well, and I have to say, you guys only have the best guests on the Entrepreneur on Fire podcast, and I can say that since I was episode 1721.
Absolutely.
But, look, I want to get to systems and processes, but there is an issue I wanted to ask you about first. I like to ask my guests something before we get to the business. And that is, I know you're in Puerto Rico, and so I wanted to hear an update on how things are going there after the hurricane.
Yeah, so things are okay. It seems like the island is secure and safe, if you will, but there's still a lot of issues. And of course, the news loves to share all the details when something's happening, and then a week later, they're on to another story. So unfortunately, being here in Puerto Rico, it honestly feels like it's kind of been swept under the rug. Like people are on to, the latest and the greatest that's going on in the world. Well, let's be real, not the greatest probably. But, that I do feel like that is unfortunate because this island needs a lot of help right now. The infrastructure is broken. And, there are some day-to-day things that are really difficult. Like I was telling you right before we hit record, Bobby, that we've been without power intermittently for ever since the hurricane, really. Honestly, we didn't get off our own generator power until like 2.5 or 3 weeks ago. And the hurricane was 4 months ago.
Wow.
So, yeah, we've got a long road ahead of us.
Yeah, I think that's a good reminder for folks. And again, I'm not going to make a political statement, but if it's something that matters to you, I think people ought to keep reaching out and keep some pressure on to make sure that Puerto Rico does get the recovery it needs. It's something that I think we should all be thinking about because, let's be honest, Kate, you and John, you guys are much better than most people who live there when it comes to resources. So I'm sure there's a lot of people who are suffering quite a bit.
Absolutely. And that's what breaks my heart about it. We're very grateful for the resources that we have. But yeah, I say we've been on our generator. There are thousands of people on this island that have no access to a generator and are still without any power.
Yeah. Well, let's turn away from that. I think it's something that people need to be thinking about and be grateful for what they have. But now let's turn to what I brought you on the show to talk about, and that's systems and processes or processes. And let me start with definitions. In your mind, is there a distinction between a system and a process?
I've gone back and forth about this a few times, and I tend to use the words interchangeably. But I guess if I had to sit down and define them, I would look at a system as a set of processes.
Okay.
So, if you will, like maybe you have a marketing system. Within that system, there are going to be a lot of different processes that help run it.
So kind of like a project is something that involves a lot of different tasks, but they're kind of a related idea.
Exactly.
Great. Now, so look, why don't you sell me and everyone else on why we should create systems or processes for our business?
Okay. Okay, I love this. So, I want to share a story with you. John launched the Entrepreneurs on Fire podcast and business in September 2012. I came on board the team 6 months later, where John and I are partners in both business and in life. I came on board 6 months later in April 2013, March 2013. 1 year after that, about in May of 2014, John and I took a trip to Europe. We hopped a plane. This, of course, took a lot of planning and preparation. I'm giving you a very short version of this. But about a year and a half after launching our business, we got on a plane. We spent 2 weeks in Europe. We visited 5 different countries, had an incredible time, and we did not go online once for our business. We didn't
Wow.
answer emails. We weren't messing with our homepage. We weren't tweaking opt ins. We weren't building campaigns. This is 1 year and a half after starting our business, and we generated just as much revenue that month as we did the month before. And I'm talking upwards. We're very transparent with our revenue. We post income reports every single month. I'm talking over $150,000 that we netted that month, and we were completely unplugged for half of it.
Wow.
The reason that that was possible is because we built systems in our business.
Okay, well, let me. So that's a good sales pitch, and I think that's a reason why people should do it. But let me ask you this: so, for a typical system or process you develop in your business, there's going to be a lot of front end work. Kind of what is, as a good guide, the time kind of for a return on your time investment? How long is it going to take you to save enough time using the system or process to make up for the time you put in up front in developing it?
Mm. This is such a huge concern for people, myself included, because I've been in this spot many times, and you even kind of alluded to it at the beginning of the episode, Bobby, is that a lot of people want to create systems, but they get right to it and they say, you know what, I'm just going to do this one more time real quick, and I'll create the system next time, because I know that if I create the system right now, it's going to take a lot more time than it would for me to just do the thing real quick. The problem with that is that you never create the system, because the next time you're going to say the exact same thing. Now, of course, this depends on what type of system, how elaborate, how intricate it is. And for me, building systems isn't really about like automating an entire thing or delegating an entire thing. It might be a mix of a bunch of different things. So the answer that you're probably not looking for is that it's going to depend on the thing that you're doing. But let me give you a specific example. So we have a lot of people reach out to us and ask about sponsoring the podcast. They want to know what our downloads are. They want to know information about our audience demographics. They want to know how much a mid-roll ad runs. They want to know how much a post-roll ad runs. They want to know what the CPM is, like a lot of information, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, if I were to take the time, every single time someone reached out to me with that email requesting that information, and I sat there and typed all that out, that would take a really long time. Even if I like copy and pasted this in a Word document, and every time the question came up, I thought like, oh, I'm being really sneaky and I'm going to save myself a bunch of time by copy pasting it. I go to the Word document, yada, yada, yada.
Right.
The system that I have right now when somebody emails me is I use canned responses in Gmail. This is a totally free thing. You just have to set it up, and it's so easy to set it up. And you can create any number of canned responses for typical emails that you send. So every time somebody emails with me with that right now, and I will tell you, it probably took me upwards of 20 minutes to outline this email because we're providing a lot of information to these people. Now, all I do is hit reply, go to my canned responses, click one button, and hit send. It
Wow.
literally takes me less than like 5 seconds. And that's something that before I was spending 20 minutes doing. So it can be a really immediate time savings. And I guess in that example, whatever 20 minutes divided by 5 seconds is, maybe that's how many times you'd have to send that email. But let me tell you, it feels so amazing when you can look back and remember what it was like to do that thing before you set the system up and how easy it is after.
Well, so I think that's a great example. And I find that anything in business and in life, when I'm trying to commit to do something, what's often helpful is getting a first easy win. And so I
Mm.
guess my question would be, is there a system that you can say, hey, just about every business needs this, and here's something you can go and set up pretty quickly and prove to yourself that the whole idea of systems is going to be worth the trouble?
Well, I think canned responses would be a great one because, another thing about systems is that I don't think that people realize that what I just described, sending an email, isn't necessarily a system. But what is a system is everything involved in me sending that email because it's not me just sending that email. It's me evaluating the person's question, doing research to come up with an answer, sitting and typing that all out, making sure that I have like any links or anything else that would be required to give that person what they've asked for. So in that, there really is a system. So I think that setting an automation tool up, and I have so many recommendations for tools like this that I'd be happy to share in this episode, is just setting up canned responses and stop wasting time sending the same exact response to people over and over and over again. Even if you don't do sponsorships for your podcast, even if you don't even have a podcast, I can guarantee you that if you sat down and just spent 5 minutes thinking about the last 20 emails you sent, there are emails in there that you could be saving tons of time on by creating some type of automated or canned response. And now, when I say canned response, I don't want people to think that this is like some robot-y or unpersonal thing, because you can always leverage a canned response and still be super personal with it. You could add a personal note, beginning, the end. You could add additional information depending on the situation. So I don't want it to come across like as an automation, like non-personal thing.
Well, and I think that's a good example. And I'll be candid with you. I am going to automate many things this year and systematize. And one of the first ones I'm going to do is create an automated way just to complete engagement agreements. I have a standard agreements I use, but quite honestly, my process had been I go and pull an old one. I delete out the stuff that for the other client and put in a new one, which just makes no sense. And
Mm.
so I'm going to go ahead and create a mergeable document. Someone can come in, fill in a survey, and it's going to automatically fill it in. So I'm going to do that. That's my small win. But you said in your last response that you have a bunch of tools and technology you'd recommend to people. Why don't we go over some of that? What are your top tools that you recommend to people for creating systems?
So definitely Asana is what I use as like a task management and sort of like systems keeper. It's kind of, I guess you could say, like my chalkboard for that sort of stuff. Asana is really great. You can use a free version of it. I use the free version of it, and I feel like I do some really incredible and amazing things with it. So it can be used for anything as simple as assigning tasks to yourself and setting reminders and recurring things that you do. It's the first thing that I check every single morning to let myself know what I'm supposed to do that day. I also use it with my team members, so you can assign things to other people and you can create sort of like checklists. And so let's see. So every month I create the income report. Like I had said before, we do this every month. And there are a lot of steps involved with doing that. Another thing that you wouldn't really think that writing an income report is a system, but I mean, I'm talking everything from like figuring out what is going to be included in the report to making sure that our numbers have been run to making sure that I have a time scheduled for it to be recorded. We invite our CPA on these income reports with us. We record it and publish it on Entrepreneurs on Fire. So I have to coordinate with him what his tip is going to be and make sure that the time works for him too. So you see there are like a lot of different moving pieces in here. So in Asana, what I did is I set up like a recurring project that is the income report and then have individual check marks underneath that overall project to make sure that I don't miss any of those steps. So Asana is a really useful tool. I loved canned responses, and along with canned responses, if you're a Gmail user, Boomerang for Gmail. I don't know what I would do without Boomerang. Do you use Gmail, Bobby?
Well, I don't, unfortunately. I actually am
Hmm.
still an Outlook, an
Okay.
Exchange person, but I found you talk about Boomerang, which for people who don't know, that's basically something in Gmail where you can basically say, hey, come back to me. You tell the message, as I understand it, to kind of go away and come back at a certain point in the future. I do something similar. I actually, from one of Amy Porterfield's podcast episodes, it was about getting to basically inbox zero. So I work
Mhm.
very hard to do that. I have a tickler file instead, but it does the same thing for me in my Outlook.
Got it. Perfect. Yeah. And what's cool about Boomerang too is it allows you to like send messages at a later date and time if you want. There's even an option to where like if I want to follow up with somebody, but I want to give them one more day to respond to me before I do it, I can draft out my response and tell Boomerang only to send it if that person doesn't reply. Like there's lots of really cool stuff you could do with it. And what it does is prevents you from being in your inbox all the time. So that's a huge time saver. Text Expander is
Mm-hmm.
another tool that I use to help me in just like automating my life a little bit, which is basically you can do shortcuts for entire words, sentences. I do it for my email address. I type my email address a lot, and typing out Kate at entrepreneuronfire.com is not fun. So I have like a shortcut for that. So a lot of little like Zapier is another one. I use Zapier to help automate lots of like in between steps in processes and systems. Process Street, so process.st is a really great platform to help you put your processes and systems together. They provide checklists. You can input video tutorials, images. So, like step by step, if you're actually documenting a system or a process, which is super key because what's the point of a system or process if you don't have it documented, right?
Yep.
So, those are like some of my favorites. I really could go on if you want me to.
Well, so one that I wanted to ask you about that I've used or started playing around with is If This Then That. Have you used
Mm.
that at all?
I have, and I just couldn't get there. I definitely see the value in it, and I understand the concept, but I guess Zapier to me was a little bit easier to understand and navigate. And from what I understand of If This Then That, it does a lot of the same things. But like, what do you use it for? What's an example?
Well, so I heard about it actually on a podcast about social media automation. And so what
Mm,
I used it for, the one that I set up, was essentially I was creating, or I had a Google sheet. And so anytime anyone mentioned me on Twitter, it would automatically put it in that sheet. So that way we could go to that sheet and find that the same thing. It basically, I created another one where everyone who followed me would be added to the sheet. So
mm.
then I could have my assistant go and try to find and say, hey, is this someone that I should engage with? I mean, is it a real person we should try to engage with, or is it not worthwhile? So I was using it for that, which I probably could do in Zapier, but I just, I found it and started using it for that purpose.
Yeah, that's super cool. I love it. I mean, I think those are a lot of the things that people feel like, oh my gosh, that's way too time consuming. I could never do that. But I mean, that's a perfect example of just taking the time to set it up and then it's completely automated. I
It,
mean, and delegated in your case.
yeah, yeah. So I think we could go on about tools. I love Asana. I use Asana. And one thing you didn't mention that I think is great is for people who don't know, in Asana, you can assign tasks within your team. So
Hmm.
you can assign tasks, you can set deadlines, you can do all those things. So it's all set up and on a calendar. Kate, I'm someone, as a lawyer, as someone who is analytical, who likes to think about things. I tend to analyze things a lot. And so I like to read books. And so I guess one thing I wonder is, are there books that you would recommend about systems and processes for people to get their hands on?
Kind of at the beginning of well, I won't say at the beginning. I've had an obsession with systems and being exactly the way you just described for pretty much my entire life, luckily. Essentialism is one book that I read that really flipped the switch for me. It's not necessarily talking about systems and how to create them, but the time management aspect of that book has had me read it 4 times over. I've seriously read that book 4 times.
Okay.
I think it's a really, really, have you read it yet?
It's actually one sitting on my bookshelf. This year, I'm actually reading 52 business books. This year is one of my SMART goals. I'm through about 6 already. TV Fast helped with that, but
holy cow.
Yeah, that's
amazing.
That's one on my bookshelf that I'm going to read that I definitely knew about and have heard mentioned so many different times.
It's a game changer. I think that book will set you up for success with implementing systems.
Okay, great. Something that I think may be related that for listeners you might want to get your hands on, again, it's not systems, but it's related, is Procrastinate on Purpose, which is by Rory Vaden. It goes through the process, automate, delegate, eliminate, kind of all these different processes to go through to figure out what you should be doing and what you should maybe not be doing right now. Kate, I think our time is running, but one thing I do like to ask my guests is if there is something that you would recommend that listeners do that they can do, say, in 5 minutes a day or get done by the end of the week to improve their business. And with you, I'd ask specifically to improve the systems or processes in their business.
Yeah, the first step that I always talk about in creating systems and processes is taking inventory in your business. And really, essentially what that means is spending like 5 minutes per day for 1 week straight and letting a piece of paper fall around and start documenting the tasks and projects that you're working on in your business. I think the first step to systems is having a really good understanding of how we're spending our time and what tasks and things we're doing repetitively, because those are going to be the easiest ones for you to create a system out of. So if you can spend a week and actually show yourself visually on paper the types of things that you're working on, by the end of that week, you're going to be able to very easily identify the things that you're working on, say, every single day. And those should be the types of tasks and projects that you start with when you start creating a system.
I think that's great advice. I think I actually have an Excel spreadsheet that has the 168-hour week, and you can do that. So listeners, I will put a link to that where you can download that on the show notes so that you can get your hands on that if you want to use a spreadsheet to do it. Kate, thanks for the advice that you've given listeners. Where can listeners get in touch with you if they want to get more information, follow you, or do anything to make sure that they are doing what they need to be doing as entrepreneurs?
Absolutely. Everything that we do is over at eofire.com. And I actually created an entire season on my podcast that's fully focused on creating systems in your business. So if anyone's interested in checking that out, it's completely free, no opt-in or anything necessary. It's eofire.com/season and the number 2. So that entire season I dedicate to walking through step-by-step how you can create systems in your business.
Thanks. I think that's a great resource for everybody. So Kate, thanks for the advice. It's been a pleasure having you on. Listeners, stay tuned. I will have a quick legal lesson about creating systems and processes after the break.
Thanks, Bobby.
And now for today's legal lesson.
Yeah! Wow. That was an action-packed interview with Kate. She's fantastic. I love her advice about setting up systems and processes in your business because I think we all need to do that. I'm not as good as I'd like to be at it, but I'm working on it. It's something that I think will make your life better, make your business better, and will allow you to repeat. In today's legal lesson, I was trying to figure out what to say about this because I could have gone a lot of different places. I could talk about how you really ought to set up systems and processes around various legal issues. But I thought about that. I said, well, but then I don't know how to give that in a condensed form. So instead, I thought what I would do is really focus in on something that will come into play when you are doing or setting up systems and processes. And that's you're going to have people working for you or working with you. And so I wanted to talk about just very quickly what you need to get in place. And almost let's set up a system for doing that. When you're going to go out and get someone to help you in your business as you set up systems and processes, what do you need to do? So I'm not giving you advice on, for example, how to find the person or what the best place is to find that. That's business issues that I think you can figure out on your own. Instead, what I want to focus on is the actual mechanics once you've decided you're going to hire a person. And whether it's hire them as an independent contractor, an employee, or anything in between, what do you need to do? So the first thing is you need to have a written agreement with that person. It needs to set out some basic terms. It needs to set out things that are pretty simple. Now, in the case of an employee, the reason why you need this is actually strange. There's not employment law that requires you to have a written agreement. But what I will tell you is if you don't have a written agreement, you might be asking for trouble. And I preach this over and over again in a lot of contexts. The point of a written agreement largely is to ensure that you're on the same page and to avoid a dispute from happening in the first place. Because if you have a written agreement and there's an issue that comes up, you say, okay, well, let's look back and see what does a written agreement say. In the context of employees, strangely, one of the biggest things that comes up is actually not anything you might expect. It's actually that people that the owners believe are employees, consultants, contractors, something along those lines, will come back and later say, no, I'm an owner. I own a piece of this. You agreed to give me, and maybe they say 5% or 10% or some percentage of the business they're going to say they own. So one of the things I always like to stress to entrepreneurs, when you hire someone, you ought to just have a standard form letter that you send them that says, hey, I'm hiring you. And it would say it's either part-time or full-time and what the job title is and what you're going to pay them. And then I just throw in a paragraph that says, hey, at this time, we're not in a position to offer any kind of profit sharing or equity in the business. We'll let you know in the future if we ever change that. But for now, you're not going to get any ownership interest in the business as a result. So you put those things in and you send it to them, send it on your letterhead, you sign it, they sign it, return it to you, boom, done, no problem. If in the future they try to come forward, you say, look, here's what we said. And so you have that as evidence. So that's the first piece, get that agreement with them. Now, the second important piece for any employee, contractor, outside person that you're working with is you want to make sure that your confidential information is protected. And what I mean by this is you don't want an employee or a contractor to be able to take your confidential information and then use it for anything outside of your business. Now, what is your confidential information? You may have some ideas, but let's just think through some quick examples. Your CRM database, your customer list, maybe you have a secret or proprietary way of doing whatever it is you do. If you're a Facebook ad agency, for example, maybe you have a methodology that you go through of creating, audiences and testing and doing things like that has been very effective. I'm making that up. I'm not a Facebook ads person, but maybe you're someone who helps book people on guests or in speaking engagements or something like that. Well, in that case, it's not just your customers, but it's also your contact list of who are the podcasts, who are the radio shows, who are the speaking coordinators, who I know. That's all proprietary information you want to protect. And if you take the right steps, your employees, contractors, et cetera, can't then take that and compete with you. But if you don't, they can walk out the door with all that information, set up a competing business, and hurt you. So what do you need to do? Well, this all has to do with setting up confidentiality policies and agreements. The policies are basically, the old phrase that applied to top secret information. You're on a need-to-know basis, and you don't need to know. In other words, you need to set up physical and electronic security in place so that the only people who have access to confidential information are people who need to know it. And I like to give examples, but if you have a VA who does nothing but book calls and maybe book your travel or things like that, they don't need to have access to your method of, creating audiences for Facebook advertising, as an example. So you need to just think this through. In the world of online entrepreneurship, this obviously comes up most in the context of figuring out how are you going to organize what you share with whom. So it's a little bit more complicated. If you use Dropbox like I do, you're going to have, one folder that maybe everybody has access to that doesn't have confidential information, then one that's just you, and then you're going to have some that are shared with your marketing people. But you just need to segregate it out that way and share with the people who need to do it. No. So it takes some work up front, but you get that in place and it will save you time in the long run. The next piece is you need a confidentiality agreement in place with anyone who will have access to your confidential information. So that's an important piece. And how do you do that? Again, basically what this is it will simply say that, as a result of your working for me, you will come into contact with confidential information, and you agree that you will not use that for any purpose other than my business. And you agree that if you have any copies of it, you'll destroy it when you leave my employment or my contract, etc. And you just set out these basic contours. The point is simply to put them on notice and make a contractual agreement so they can't use your information against you. Okay, so that's a confidentiality agreement and the confidentiality piece. Now, there's one other piece that many people miss. And again, you can do this as a standalone agreement. You could put it in the agreement you had them sign that set out other things, but you need to have an express agreement where they agree to transfer and actually do transfer any intellectual property they create to you or the business. This is a piece that a lot of people miss. Quite honestly, a lot of lawyers don't realize this and advise their people, but me as an intellectual property lawyer, I know it's a must because, for example, you cannot transfer federally protected intellectual property without a written agreement. But aside from that, you also want to make sure that you don't have any dispute about this issue. So you want a written agreement that says that. These will be, you can make it complicated, but the important language you need to have in there is you would say that the employee or contractor, whatever, agrees to assign and hereby does assign. And that second piece is the important part. Hereby does assign. And then you say all rights, title, and interest to any intellectual property created as a result of their employment. Again, if you came to me, I'm going to give you language that's going to be broader than intellectual property. It's going to define that term and do all that. But at least get what I've just given you in writing from them. So what have we talked about? We basically said you need to, number one, have a signed agreement with anyone you hire that makes clear they don't own the business and don't get any piece of the business. 2, you need confidentiality issues in place. And that's a policy, but also agreements. And 3, you need to make sure that there is a written transfer of all intellectual property to you. So you need to basically put these steps in place anytime you bring someone on as you're building out your systems and processes in your business. If you do that, you will be in much better shape. So that's it. That's the legal lesson for today. I hope you will take Kate's advice and start building systems and processes in your business. I'm going to continue to try and improve in this area, but it's worth your while. And as you do, let's just be careful. Make sure you're protecting yourself from a legal perspective. That's it for now. Next week, we have another great episode, so I hope you'll stick around for that. But in the meantime, I'm Bobby Klink signing off.
Thanks for listening. And remember to visit mistakes.youronlinegenius.com to get your essential guide to the 4 legal mistakes that can doom your business and how to avoid them. Join us next week for another episode to expand your online genius and your success.